Liar or a thief, Miss Hole? His words cut like a shard. Eliza gripped the counter, the diner's greasy scent suddenly suffocating. $300 lay on the cracked formica. Hush money for a secret she didn't even know she possessed. Her mother? A thief? Impossible. Gideon Pierce, the ice-blooded billionaire, had no idea. He thinks he's untouchable, but he's wrong. See, Eliza's kindness, that quiet strength she shows even when drowning in medical bills, it's a weapon, a promise of a future act that he won't expect. They'll all regret underestimating her. He thinks he's burying the truth. The fool. She was just trying to get through her shift. He was just another faceless tycoon in a suit. But when she saw the ring on his finger, a flicker of a memory became an inferno that would threaten to burn down a century-old dynasty. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a casual remark in a cheap diner unraveled a web of lies, betrayal, and a secret that one of America's most powerful families thought was buried forever. The fluorescent lights of the corner booth diner hummed a monotonous tune, a sound Eliza Hole knew better than her own heartbeat. It was the soundtrack to her life, the sizzle of burgers on the griddle, the clatter of cheap ceramic plates, the low murmur of conversations that never seemed to change. At 9:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, the diner was in its nightly lull, a brief respite between the dinner rush and the late-night crowd. Eliza leaned against the cool stainless steel counter, rolling her shoulders to work out a knot of exhaustion. Every muscle ached with a fatigue that was more than physical. It was the soul-deep weariness of watching her mother Laura slowly fade in a sterile beige hospital room. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Eliza from her thoughts. A man stepped inside, and an invisible curtain of silence seemed to fall over the diner. He wasn't just well-dressed. He was sculpted from a different material than the rest of the world. His suit, a charcoal gray, so dark it was nearly black, fit him with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. His shoes gleamed even under the diner's grimy lights. He had the kind of quiet, absolute confidence that doesn't need to be announced. It simply is. The few remaining patrons instinctively lowered their voices. He chose a booth in the corner, sliding onto the cracked vinyl seat with an economy of motion. Eliza grabbed a menu and a glass of water, her professional smile pasted on. "Welcome to the corner booth. Can I get you started with something?" The man didn't look at the menu. His eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, met hers for a brief dismissive moment. "Just coffee, Black." His voice was low and resonant, a cello in a room of tin whistles. "Coming right up," Eliza said, retreating to the counter. Her friend and fellow waitress Chloe sidled up to her. "Get a load of Mr. Moneybags. Thinks he's too good for a menu. $10, says he's Gideon Pierce." Eliza frowned as she poured the coffee. "Who?" "Gideon Pierce. Pierce Holdings International. They own half the downtown skyline. My dad used to be a foreman on one of their sites before he got laid off. That guy's picture is in the business section every other week. They say he's ruthless, turned his family's millions into billions before he was 30. Eliza glanced over at the man. He was staring out the window, his profile sharp and severe against the neon-lit street. He looked less like a businessman and more like a predator resting between hunts. She picked up the cup and saucer. "Well, to me, he's just another customer who wants black coffee." She walked back to the booth and set the coffee down. "Here you are, sir." As he reached for the cup, his hand emerged from his cufflink-adorned sleeve, and on his right ring finger, nestled against his skin, was a ring that made Eliza's breath catch in her throat. It wasn't the size or the gleam of it that stopped her. It was the design, an intricate masculine signet ring made of a pale buttery gold. Etched into the flat face was a sigil, a stylized phoenix. Its wings spread wide with a single tiny sapphire set in its eye, sparkling like a captured star. The band itself was unique, carved to look like intertwined feathers. Eliza's mind reeled. She saw the same ring not gleaming under a dinerite, but resting in a small velvet-lined box on her mother's bedside table. Laura's ring was identical in every detail, down to the tiny, impossibly blue sapphire eye. It was her most cherished possession, the one thing she'd refused to sell even when the medical bills became a tidal wave, threatening to drown them. Her father, she'd always said, had given it to her on his deathbed. "It's a promise, Eliza." She would whisper, her voice thin and ready, a promise of what's right. The words tumbled out of Eliza's mouth before she could stop them. A quiet, stunned whisper. "Hi, sir. My mother has a ring just like yours." Gideon Pierce froze his hand, hovering over the coffee cup. He slowly retracted it, and his piercing blue eyes lifted to meet hers. The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by a sudden glacial intensity. He didn't speak. He simply stared, his gaze so sharp and analytical it felt like he was dissecting her, searching for the punchline to a joke she wasn't telling. "Excuse me," he finally said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously soft. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt Chloe's worried stare from across the room. She should have just walked away, kept her mouth shut. But the image of her mother's frail hand clutching that identical ring was burned into her mind. "The ring?" she stammered, pointing a trembling finger. "On your hand. It's the same as my mother's. The phoenix, the little sapphire, everything." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Not surprise, not recognition, but something harder, darker. He slowly turned his hand over, examining the ring as if seeing it for the first time. "That's impossible," he stated. It wasn't a guess. It was a verdict. "But it's not," Eliza insisted, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "She's had it my whole life. Her father gave it to her. It's one of a kind," he told her. Gideon Pierce placed his hand flat on the table, the ring, a silent golden accusation. His gaze was cold steel. "This ring," he said, enunciating each word with chilling precision, "has been in the Pierce family for over 100 years. It was custom-made for my great-grandfather, all Alaric Pierce. There is no other. There has never been another. You are mistaken." The finality in his tone felt like a slap. He was calling her a liar, or worse, a fool. The injustice of it piled on top of her exhaustion, and fear for her mother ignited a spark of defiance in her. "I'm not mistaken," she said, her voice low but firm. "I've held it in my hands 1,000 times. I know every detail on it. I could draw it from memory." He leaned back, a faint, condescending smile touching his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "A fascinating story. What is your name?" "Eliza." "Eliza Holay." "Well, Miss Holay," he said, picking up his coffee cup and taking a slow, deliberate sip. "Your mother is either a liar or a thief. Because the only way she has a ring like this is if it's the one that was stolen from my family 50 years ago." He set the cup down with a soft click. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of Eliza's world. Stolen. The word hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Her mother, the gentlest, most honest person she knew. A thief. The accusation was so absurd, so vile, it was like being told the sun rose in the west. Gideon Pierce reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a slim leather wallet, and extracted 3 $100 bills, placing them on the table. It was more than she made in 2 shifts. It was an insult, a dismissal for the coffee and your time, he said, his eyes already looking past her toward the door. He stood up, the power of his presence filling the small booth. He was already gone, moving on, leaving her in the wreckage of his words. As he walked toward the exit, Eliza found her voice. "She's not a thief." He paused at the door, his back to her. He didn't turn around, but his voice carried clearly across the quiet diner. "Then prove it." The bell chimed again, and he was gone, leaving Eliza standing in the middle of the corner booth, her heart pounding, the hum of the lights now sounding like a scream. The 3 crisp bills on the table felt like blood money. She hadn't just served coffee to a billionaire. She had stumbled into a story, his story, and in doing so, she realized with a cold dread she may have just destroyed her own. The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic lights and the anxious thumping of her own heart. Gideon Pierce's words echoed in her head. A liar or a thief? It was preposterous. Laura Holay was a woman who would walk back into a store to return a few cents of extra change. The accusation was a poisoned dart, and Eliza felt its venom spreading through her. She found her mother sleeping, her face pale and sunken against the pristine white of the hospital pillow. The ever-present beep of the cardiac monitor was a fragile, rhythmic reassurance. On the small bedside table next to a glass of water and a well-worn book of poetry sat the small dark blue velvet box. With trembling hands, Eliza picked it up. The velvet was worn smooth in places. She opened the lid. There it was, the pale gold ring catching the low light from the hallway, the phoenix with its proud spread wings, and the eye a tiny sapphire that seemed to hold a universe of secrets. It was identical. There was no question. "Eliza, honey, is that you?" Laura's voice was weak, raspy. Eliza quickly shut the box and turned, forcing a smile. "Hey, Mom. I didn't mean to wake you. Your late rough shift." Laura's eyes, though clouded with illness, were still sharp, still full of a fierce love that had been Eliza's anchor her entire life. The usual. Eliza couldn't bring herself to tell the truth. How could she voice such a monstrous accusation to this frail woman? "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been run over by a very slow, very expensive truck," Laura said with a weak smile. The doctors were in. More talk of options. It all sounds the same. She shifted in the bed, wincing, and her eyes fell on the box in Eliza's hand. Her expression changed. The weariness was replaced by a familiar, guarded look. "You were looking at the ring." Eliza hesitated. "I was just thinking about Dad." Laura's hand, thin and crisscrossed with blue veins, reached out and she patted the mattress beside her. Eliza sat down. "Your grandfather," Laura corrected gently, as she always did. "It was my father who gave it to me, not yours." Eliza's father had been a good man, a mechanic who died in a workshop accident when she was 10, leaving behind nothing but debts and happy memories. The ring predated him. "Right, Granddad," Eliza said, her mind racing. "Mom, tell me about him again." "About the ring?" Laura's gaze drifted to the window, to the dark sky outside. "There's not much to tell that you haven't heard. My father, Owen, was a quiet man, a brilliant man, an engineer. He worked for a big corporation back east. He said the ring was payment for a promise that was broken by powerful men." "What kind of promise?" Eliza pressed, trying to keep her voice casual. "He never said, only that it was about recognizing what was right. He made me swear to never sell it, to keep it safe. He said, one day it might be the only proof we have." "Proof of what?" A flicker of fear, real and raw, crossed Laura's face. She looked at Eliza, her eyes pleading. "Leave it be, Eliza. It's an old story, a sad story. It has nothing to do with us anymore. Some doors are best left closed." "But Mom, what if someone else has a reason to open that door?" The words were out before she could stop them. Laura's grip on her hand tightened. "What do you mean? What happened?" Eliza saw the spike on the heart monitor and cursed herself. "Nothing. It's nothing. Just a stupid thing at work." She couldn't burden her mother with this. Not now. She needed to protect her. But the seed of doubt had been planted. A promise that was broken by powerful men. Who were they? And what did any of it have to do with Gideon Pierce? Miles away, in a penthouse apartment that seemed to float above the city, Gideon Pierce stood before a floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights spread out below him like a carpet of scattered diamonds. He held a glass of scotch, the amber liquid untouched. He hadn't been able to shake the encounter at the diner. The girl, Eliza Holay, her wide, honest eyes, her absolute certainty. "My mother has a ring just like yours." It was ludicrous. And yet he walked over to a heavy mahogany desk and switched on a green-shaded lamp. From a locked drawer, he retrieved a leather-bound folio, the Pierce Family Archives. It was a curated, sanitized history, of course, but it was all he had. He opened it to the section on family heirlooms. There on a yellowed page was a photograph of the ring. His ring. The description was clear. The Phoenix signet commissioned in 1922 by Alaric Pierce. Forged by artisan Michel Dubois of Paris. Unique design, symbol of the Pierce family's rebirth from the ashes of the 1921 financial panic. Sole ownership passed down to the male heir of each generation. His father had given him the ring on his 21st birthday. "It represents our resilience, Gideon," he'd said, his voice thick with pride. "We always rise. Never forget that." Gideon's phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen. "Genevieve Adler," he answered. "Adler, you're still up," came a crisp, no-nonsense voice. Genevieve Adler was more than his lawyer. She was his fixer, the executive of his will, and the keeper of his secrets. "Something has come up," Gideon said, his voice tight. "I need you to run a background check discreetly. Another hostile takeover, a person, her name is Eliza Holay. She works at a diner on 6th Street called the Corner Booth. Her mother's name is Laura Holay. I want to know everything. Financials, family history, where they came from, who their people were, everything." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Genevieve was too professional to ask why, but he could feel her curiosity. "Is this a personal or professional matter, Gideon?" Gideon looked at the ring on his finger, the phoenix staring back at him with its cold sapphire eye. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted, a rare moment of uncertainty, "but it has the potential to become problematic." He thought back to the story his grandfather used to tell, a story told only in hushed tones after a few too many brandies, about Alaric Pierce's younger brother Daniel. How Daniel had betrayed the family, tried to steal Alaric's designs for a new kind of turbine engine, and in his greed had taken the spare signet ring Alaric had foolishly commissioned. Daniel, the story went, was disowned, cast out, and the ring was lost with him, a symbol of treachery. But the official family history, the one in the folio, never mentioned a second ring. It never mentioned a brother named Daniel. It was a ghost story, a family legend until now. "Find out who Laura Holloway's father was," Gideon commanded, his voice hardening again, the moment of uncertainty passing. "I want his name. I want to know what he did for a living. And I want to know if he ever, for any reason, crossed paths with my family." He hung up the phone. The waitress had said her grandfather gave her mother the ring. A quiet engineer, broken promises, powerful men. For the first time in a very long time, Gideon Pierce felt a sliver of something other than control. It felt like walking on thin ice, hearing the first faint crackle of it giving way beneath his feet. He had told the girl to prove it, but now he realized with a grim certainty he had to do the same. He had to prove his own story was the truth. 3 days later, the name arrived in a single encrypted line of text from Genevieve Adler Owen Calloway. The name meant nothing to Gideon. He ran it through the private databases of Pierce Holdings, cross-referencing it with employee records, contractor lists, and financial dealings going back a century. Nothing. No Owen Calloway had ever worked for or with his family's company. He felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by suspicion. It was too clean. He was stewing in his office, a vast expanse of glass and steel on the 80th floor, when Genevieve herself appeared at his door. She was a severe woman in her 50s, always dressed in impeccably tailored suits, her gray hair pulled back in a tight shiny. She held a thin file. "You're not going to like this," she said, foregoing any greeting. She placed the file on his desk. Gideon opened it. Inside were public records, a birth certificate for Laura Ann Calloway, born in Wilmington, Delaware, father Owen Calloway, mother Helen Calloway, and then another document, a patent application from 1968. Inventor Owen Calloway, invention, a novel gearing system for high-torque industrial turbines. A SNE of patent none, application withdrawn. Gideon's blood ran cold. He recognized the schematic. It was a primitive but unmistakable precursor to the Pierce Mark III turbine, the very invention that had catapulted his grandfather's company from a regional player into a global powerhouse in the early 70s. The invention credited solely to his grandfather, William Pierce. The application was withdrawn on October 12, 1968. Genevieve said, her voice flat. According to banking records I accessed on October 14, 1968, Owen Calloway made a one-time cash deposit of $50,000 into his savings account, a significant sum for an engineer at the time. He quit his job a week later, moved his family, and never worked in engineering again. He died of a heart attack 6 years later, at the age of 42. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. A non-disclosure agreement, a cash payoff, a brilliant idea bought and buried under the Pierce name, so he was bought off. Gideon said, the words tasting like ash. My grandfather stole his invention and paid him to keep quiet. It appears that way, Genevieve confirmed. The $50,000 was likely positioned as a consulting fee to keep it legal. There's no paper trail linking it directly to the patent. Of course, your grandfather was meticulous. And the ring? Gideon asked, looking at his own hand. That, Genevieve said, is where it gets strange. I found the jeweler who bought the assets of Dubois Ace of Paris. The records are ancient, but their ledgers were like your grandfather, meticulous. In 1922, Alaric Pierce commissioned 2 identical Phoenix signet rings. He paid for both. There's a note in the margin in the artisan's hand. She slid a translated copy across the desk. It read, "One for the builder, one for the dreamer. May they fly together." 2 rings. The family ghost story wasn't a story. It was true. His great-uncle Daniel existed. "So Calloway didn't steal the ring," Gideon murmured, thinking aloud. Daniel Pierce, the disowned brother, must have given it to him. But why? As a thank you, a token for a friend, or something more? The puzzle was no longer about a simple diner waitress. It was about the very bedrock of his family's legacy. It was built not just on resilience, but on a lie. The knowledge was a corrosive acid in his gut. He had to speak to her again. Eliza was wiping down the counter at the end of another grueling shift when the bell on the door chimed. Her heart sank. It was him. Gideon Pierce didn't enter the diner this time. He stood in the doorway, the city lights framing him like a dark halo. He was dressed more casually in dark trousers and a cashmere sweater, but he still radiated an unapproachable aura of power. "M. Holloway," he said, his voice quiet but carrying. "I need to speak with you." Chloe shot her a nervous look. "Eliza, you don't have to." But Eliza knew she did. She untied her apron and hung it on its hook. "It's okay. I'll be right back." She stepped out into the cool night air. The street was loud with the sounds of the city, a stark contrast to the tense silence that fell between them. "Your mother's father?" Gideon began getting straight to the point. His name was Owen Calloway. It wasn't a question. Eliza flinched. How did he know that? Yes. What of it? He was an engineer. In 1968, he filed a patent for a turbine gear system. Gideon watched her face, carefully gauging her reaction. Eliza's mind went blank. She knew her grandfather was an engineer, but the details were a fog. Her mother never spoke of his work, only of his sadness. "I don't know anything about that," she said honestly. "I think you do." Gideon countered, his voice sharp with impatience. "Or your mother does." "My grandfather, William Pierce, launched a turbine based on an identical design a few years later. It made my family a fortune." Calloway withdrew his patent and accepted a cash payment. "This isn't about a stolen ring anymore, is it, Ms. Hollet? This is about a shakedown. Is that your plan? Use this old story to leverage a payday for your mother's medical bills." The accusation was so cynical, so cruel, it knocked the air from her lungs. Tears of pure rage and frustration sprang to her eyes. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "You stand there in your thousand sweater looking down on us. My mother is fighting for her life. You think this is about money, this is about her honor. The honor of a man you just admitted your family probably robbed." For the first time, Gideon looked taken back. He saw not a schemer, but a daughter pushed to her breaking point. "My grandfather told my mother that ring was proof," Eliza continued, her voice rising. "Proof that he was wronged. He didn't take a payoff. He was threatened, forced to sign away his life's work to protect his family from men like your grandfather. That money wasn't a payment. It was hush money to ensure he never spoke of it again. She was channeling her mother's long-held, unspoken pain. The words felt true, solid, righteous. Gideon was silent for a long moment, the sounds of the city rushing in to fill the space between them. His own certainty was eroding, replaced by the disquing possibility that the waitress's version of the story, a tale of threats and coercion, was closer to the truth than the sanitized version of a simple business transaction he had constructed. "There were 2 rings," he said, his voice losing its hard edge. "My great-grandfather had 2 made, one for him and one for his brother Daniel. The family story is that Daniel was a traitor who was cast out." He looked at her, his blue eyes searching her face. "Was your grandfather friends with a man named Daniel Pierce?" Eliza stared at him bewildered. "Daniel Pierce? I've never heard that name in my life." They were at an impasse, 2 families, 2 rings, and 2 completely different histories that intersected at a single disputed point in the past. One story of a clean, if ruthless, business deal, another of theft and intimidation. And at the center of it all, a ghost named Daniel Pierce and a ring that was supposed to be a promise. "My mother has the ring," Eliza said, her resolve hardening. "You have your story. I have mine, and I'm going to find out which one is true." Gideon gave a single sharp nod. The condescension was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. "So am I. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the city's shadows, leaving Eliza with the chilling realization that their quest for the truth was now inextricably and dangerously linked. The confrontation with Gideon Pierce left Eliza shaken but resolute. She had defended her family's honor, but his questions echoed in her mind. Daniel Pierce. The name was a blank slate. She returned to the hospital the next day with a new sense of urgency. She found Laura sitting up, looking a little stronger than the day before. The poetry book was open on her lap. "Mom," Eliza began, pulling a chair close. "We need to talk for real this time. No more secrets." Laura sighed a long, weary sound and closed the book. "I knew this day would come. Seeing you with the box, I knew you wouldn't let it go." She looked at her daughter, her eyes full of a deep, ancient sorrow. "What did he say to you?" "He?" Eliza asked, feigning ignorance. "Don't play coy, Eliza. The man from the diner." "You think a man like Gideon Pierce makes a scene, and it doesn't get noticed," Chloe called me. She was worried sick. Eliza's shoulders slumped. "He found me. He knows about Granddad Owen. He thinks we're trying to blackmail him. He thinks Granddad sold his invention to the Pierce family." Laura's expression hardened. "Sold it. Is that what they call it?" She scoffed, a bitter, rattling sound. "Your grandfather was a genius, Eliza, a gentle, trusting soul who thought the world worked on merit and good faith. He was working at a large firm, a competitor to Pierce Industries at the time. He developed his turbine gearing system on his own time. It was his masterpiece." She paused, her gaze distant, lost in the memory. He made the mistake of mentioning it to a colleague, trusting him. That colleague left the company 2 months later for a senior position at Pierce Industries. 6 months after that, your grandfather received a visit from 2 men. They weren't lawyers. They were persuaders. They worked for William Pierce. The sterile hospital room suddenly felt cold. "What did they do?" Eliza whispered. "They didn't lay a hand on him," Laura said, her voice dropping. "They were smarter than that. They laid out photographs on our kitchen table. Pictures of me playing in the schoolyard. Pictures of your grandmother leaving the grocery store. They told him what a beautiful family he had. And they told him it would be a shame if something were to happen to them. Then they put a stack of papers in front of him. A non-disclosure agreement and a contract assigning all rights to his invention to a shell corporation owned by Pierce Industries, and an envelope full of cash. The story was uglier than Eliza could have imagined. This wasn't business. It was gangster tactics. He signed everything, Laura continued, her voice trembling. What choice did he have? He took the money because refusing it would have been an act of defiance, and he was too scared to defy them. We moved a week later. He was a broken man, Eliza. They didn't just steal his work, they stole his soul. He died 6 years later. But the truth is, they killed him that day in our kitchen. Tears streamed down Eliza's face. She finally understood the deep well of sadness in her mother, the fear behind her warnings. But the ring, Mom? Eliza pressed gently. Where does the ring come into it? Who is Daniel Pierce? Laura flinched at the name, a genuine startled reaction. Where did you hear that name? Gideon told me. He said his great-grandfather had 2 rings made, one for himself and one for his brother Daniel, who was disowned. Laura was silent for a full minute, her brow furrowed in concentration. Daniel Owen never said the name Pierce. He only ever called him my friend, his only friend in that terrible time. She began to recount a different part of the story, one she'd never shared. After Owen was forced out, he fell into a deep depression, but one man sought him out. A man who introduced himself only as Daniel. He was a drifter, an outcast, but he had an artist's soul and a hatred for the kind of corporate greed that had destroyed Owen. He had heard what happened to Owen through the engineering grapevine. This Daniel Laura recounted told your grandfather that he too had been betrayed by a powerful family. He understood what it was to have everything stolen by your own blood. They became friends, 2 broken men finding solace in each other's company. Before Daniel left town for good, he gave Owen the ring. She looked at Eliza, her eyes intense. He told Owen this was meant to symbolize a shared dream between brothers. It was forged in hope and tainted by greed. It belongs to the wronged, not the wrongdoer. Keep it as proof that integrity has a value that money can't buy. One day, the phoenix will rise for the right person. Owen cherished that ring more than the invention itself. It was a symbol that he wasn't alone in his suffering. So Daniel Pierce wasn't a traitor. He was another victim. And he had given the ring his own birthright to another wronged man as an act of solidarity. The story was so much more profound, so much more tragic than Gideon's cold family ledger. At the same time, Gideon was in his family's ancestral home, a sprawling stone estate an hour outside the city. He rarely came here. It felt more like a museum than a home filled with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. In the library, a room paneled in dark wood that smelled of old paper and polish, he met his cousin, Robert Pierce. Robert was a few years older with a practiced smile and the easy charm of a man who had never worked a day in his life. He managed the family's charitable foundation, a role that required him to attend galas and cut ribbons. "Gideon, to what do we owe the honor?" Robert said, pouring 2 glasses of brandy, tired of the concrete jungle. "I'm looking for information." "Robert," Gideon said, cutting to the chase about great-uncle Daniel. Robert's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Daniel, the black sheep, that old ghost story. What's gotten into you?" "I have reason to believe the story is true, and I need to know the details." "The real details, not the sanitized version." Robert swirled the brandy in his snifter, suddenly looking thoughtful. "Well, you know the legend. He was the younger brother, the artist, the dreamer. All Alaric was the pragmatist, the builder. Daniel apparently accused Alaric of stealing his ideas for the company's early successes, tried to stage a boardroom coup. When it failed, he vanished, but not before stealing a valuable ring and supposedly selling company secrets to a rival." Robert sighed dramatically. A classic tale of sibling rivalry and betrayal. It's why the line of succession has always been so rigidly defined, to prevent another Daniel. This was the story Gideon had always known. But hearing it now, it felt thin theatrical, a convenient narrative to justify Alaric's consolidation of power. "And you believe that?" Gideon asked. "Why shouldn't I?" "It's our history," Robert said with a shrug. "It's a bit dramatic, sure, but it explains why the family closed ranks, why Grandpa William was so aggressive in his business dealings. He was protecting the family legacy from vultures from another betrayal." He leaned forward, his voice conspiratorial. "Why the sudden interest? Did one of his descendants crawl out of the woodwork looking for a handout?" The question was casual, but the look in Robert's eyes was sharp probing. Gideon felt a sudden instinctual distrust. Robert had always seemed vapid, but perhaps that was a carefully constructed facade. "It's a private matter," Gideon said, his voice clipped. Of course," Robert said, leaning back, the charming smile returning. "Well, if you want to dig up old bones, be my guest. The old family papers are in the West Wing study. Gramps Williams' private correspondence. Knock yourself out. Just don't be surprised if the ghost you find is uglier than you imagined." Gideon left Robert with his brandy and went to the study. The room was dusty, unused for years. He found the boxes of letters tied with faded ribbon. For hours he sorted through them, reading his grandfather's elegant cursive script. Most of it was business, but then he found a series of letters from the late 1960s, addressed to his grandfather's head of security. The content made him feel ill. There were updates on the surveillance of a man named Owen Calloway, reports on his daughter's school schedule, his wife's daily routine, and then a final chilling memo. Subject: Calloway has been neutralized. Asset secured. He is no longer a threat. Neutralized. Asset secured. Eliza Holay's story was true. It was all true. His family's fortune was built on theft and cemented with threats. The weight of the discovery was crushing. But as he continued to sift through the papers, he found something else. Something that didn't fit either his story or Eliza's. It was a single folded note separate from the letters tucked into the back of a ledger. It was in his grandfather William's handwriting, but it was frantic, almost illegible. "He knows I found him. He can ruin everything. Daniel is the key. Must protect the name." The note was undated. Who was he? And who was our Robert? It seemed too convenient. And what did it mean? Daniel is the key. Daniel was supposed to be a ghost, a long-vanished traitor, but this note written decades after Daniel's disappearance spoke of him as a present active threat. Gideon stood in the dusty, silent study, holding 2 conflicting testaments. In one hand, the sordid truth of his grandfather's crime against Owen Calloway. In the other, a cryptic note that suggested a deeper, more complex conspiracy was at play. The story was no longer just about his grandfather and Eliza's. There was a third player, a hidden thread, and the name of that thread was Daniel. The discovery of his grandfather's note threw Gideon into a state of focused obsession. He knows RH found him. Daniel is the key. It was a cipher. And Gideon knew he couldn't crack it alone. The animosity between him and Eliza had melted away, replaced by the grim reality that they were the only two people with a stake in the complete truth. He found her where he knew she'd be, in the hospital cafeteria, staring into a cup of coffee with the same haunted expression he saw in the mirror. He sat down opposite her, placing a thin file on the table between them. "Your mother was right," he said, his voice devoid of its usual authority, filled instead with a quiet gravity about everything, the threats, the coercion. "My grandfather put your family through hell." He pushed the file forward. It contained the copies of the surveillance reports on the Calloway family. "This is the proof." Eliza opened the file, her hands trembling as she read the cold, clinical descriptions of her mother as a little girl being watched. Her face palled. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of vindication and horror. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because my story is falling apart, and so is yours," Gideon said. "There's more to it." He told her about the note. "Daniel is the key. It was written by my grandfather, William, long after your grandfather was silenced. He was scared of someone who knew the truth about Daniel." Eliza frowned. "But Daniel gave my grandfather the ring. He was an outcast, a victim like Owen. That's what he told your grandfather." Gideon counted. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if Daniel's disappearance wasn't just about him being cast out? "We have two stories, yours and mine, but they're both based on what we were told by people who were themselves betrayed or lying. We need a primary source, an objective truth." "Where do we find that?" Eliza asked, the weight of a multi-generational conspiracy settling on her shoulders. "The rings," Gideon said, a spark of inspiration in his eyes. "They're the one constant. They're the origin point. My great-grandfather Alaric commissioned them from a Parisian artisan, Michel Dubois. The business is gone, but I found the firm that acquired its assets and, more importantly, its records, the ledgers in Paris." Eliza's heart sank. That was a world away. "I had the relevant pages scanned and sent over this morning," Gideon said, tapping his phone. "The high-resolution images are waiting in my office. I need another set of eyes. Your eyes. You know your ring better than anyone." An hour later, Eliza found herself in a place she could never have imagined, Gideon Pierce's office on the 80th floor. The silence was absolute. The view of the city breathtaking. On a massive screen that covered one wall was a high-resolution image of a page from an old leather-bound ledger. The script was elegant, spidery French, a translated transcript scrolled beside it. They pored over the entry for all Alaric Pierce's 1922 commission. As Genevieve had discovered, it listed two identical rings. But as they zoomed in on the artisan's original French notes, Eliza saw something the translator had missed. The translator's note read, "One for the builder, one for the dreamer." But the original French was more specific. Eliza had taken 4 years of French in high school, and while she was rusty, one phrase jumped out at her: guardian. "That's not dreamer," Eliza said slowly, pointing at the screen. "Guardian diem. It means guardian of the soul." Gideon zoomed in, reading the phrase, guardian of the soul. He repeated the words, feeling heavy and significant. A builder of an empire and a guardian of its soul. It wasn't a rivalry. It was meant to be a partnership, a balance. This changed everything. All Alaric and Daniel weren't meant to be competitors. They were meant to be two halves of a whole. The story of Daniel's betrayal was a complete fabrication. As they scanned further down the page, Gideon noticed a small annotation next to the entry, added in a different hand and with different ink. It was dated 1945. "What's this?" he murmured, enlarging the note. The French was spidery and difficult to read. "Reçu Daniel Pierce." The note began. "Received a letter from Mr. Daniel Pierce." Gideon translated haltingly. "He asks for a modification to the second ring to the inside of the band. He is no longer a Pierce. He is something else. Gideon and Eliza exchanged a look. No longer a Pierce, Eliza whispered. He changed his name, Gideon realized. When he was cast out, he abandoned the family name entirely. The note continued, Irel Owen. He asked me to inscribe a name. Gideon read his voice, catching the name Owen. Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Owen, my grandfather's name. But this was in 1945. My grandfather wouldn't have met Daniel for another 20 years. It's not your grandfather's name, Gideon said, a sudden shocking realization dawning on him. He typed furiously on his keyboard, pulling up his family's genealogy records, going back further than he ever had before. His fingers flew, his mind racing. He found his great-grandfather All Alaric Pierce, then his great-grandmother Beatrice, and then he found her family tree. Her maiden name was Beaumont, and her father, Alaric's father-in-law, his name was Owen Beaumont, a wealthy shipping magnate who had bankrolled Alaric's early ventures, who had died in 1944. The truth hit them both like a physical blow. The inscription wasn't for Eliza's grandfather. It was a memorial. The ring, Eliza breathed, piecing it together. The ring wasn't for two brothers to share, it was for a father and son. All Alaric Pierce and his son, William, my grandfather. No, Gideon set his eyes wide with the horrifying clarity of the truth. All Alaric didn't have a son named William in 1922. His son William was born in 1925. In 1922, Alaric Pierce had one child, a son born in 1905, his firstborn son. He clicked one last time, and a black and white photograph filled the screen. It was a formal portrait of two young men, both handsome and proud. One was clearly a young All Alaric Pierce. The other, the dreamer, the guardian of the soul, was his brother. Underneath the photograph was the caption, Alaric and Daniel Pierce, 1921. And beneath that, in the official genealogical record, was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. The entry for Daniel Pierce listed his full name, Daniel Owen Pierce. Daniel was the Owen the ring was inscribed for. It wasn't a memorial to his father-in-law. He was reclaiming his middle name, the only part of his identity his brother couldn't take from him. The twist was so profound, so complete, that the room fell silent. The entire family history was a lie. Daniel wasn't the younger brother. Based on his birth year, he was the older brother. He should have been the heir. All Alaric was the younger son, the builder. And William Pierce, Gideon's grandfather, wasn't Alaric's only son. He was the second son. Daniel was All Alaric's firstborn. No, wait. Gideon looked at the birth dates again. Daniel, born 1905. William, born 1925. That couldn't be right. They weren't brothers. Alaric and Daniel were brothers, but William wasn't Daniel's brother. He was his nephew. The story they'd been chasing was wrong. The players were wrong. Eliza's grandfather hadn't met a random outcast. He had met Daniel Owen Pierce, the true disinherited heir to the Pierce fortune, and Daniel hadn't given him a token of solidarity. He had given him the ring, his own ring, inscribed with his own name for safekeeping. It was a piece of evidence, a dormant claim to an empire. And William Pierce, Gideon's grandfather, hadn't just stolen an invention from Owen Calloway. He had done it to suppress a man who had been in contact with the one person on earth who could challenge his own father's and therefore his own legitimacy, his uncle Daniel Pierce. The note he knows. Ah, found him. Daniel is the key. Snapped into focus. He was Owen Calloway. R was likely Robert's father or grandfather, another part of the conspiracy. And Daniel was the key because his existence and his connection to Calloway threatened to unravel the foundational lie upon which William Pierce's entire life and fortune were built. They hadn't just silenced an inventor, they were silencing a witness. The truth pieced together from the artisan's ledger was more corrupt than they had ever imagined. Daniel Owen Pierce, the rightful heir, had been systematically erased from history. Gideon's grandfather, William, had silenced Owen Calloway, not over a simple invention, but to bury the foundational lie of their family's power. It became terrifyingly clear that Gideon's cousin, Robert, knew this dirty secret and was positioning himself to use it as a weapon in a corporate power play. There was only one place to force a reckoning, the annual Pierce Foundation Charity Gala, Robert's personal stage. For Eliza, her mother's presence was non-negotiable. This fight was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was about delivering justice. And for that to happen, the victim's voice had to be heard. The grand ballroom glittered with false brilliance, a perfect setting for the unmasking. Robert was in his element, the charming, benevolent host. That was until he saw Gideon and Eliza cutting a path directly toward him. His practiced smile became a brittle facade. Robert Gideon began, his voice low and cold, cutting through the pleasantries. "The games are over. We know about Daniel Owen Pierce, the true heir." Robert scoffed, preparing a condescending dismissal. "Gideon, you've clearly been listening to fairy tales from a—" He was cut off by a woman's voice, weak but amplified by a microphone that sliced through the ballroom's polite chatter. "His fairy tale cost my father his life." A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the entrance where Laura Holloway sat in a wheelchair, her gaze locked on Robert with an intensity that defied her frailness. "William Pierce destroyed my father because he was friends with the honorable man your family threw away," Laura declared. "My father was forced to keep your secret. I will not." As gasps rippled through the stunned crowd, the massive screens on stage meant to display photos of the foundation's good works flickered. Eliza held up her phone, and the damning image from the Parisian Ledger filled the screens for all to see. The entry detailing the commission for 2 rings, and the name to be inscribed within the second Owen. Trapped, Robert stared from Laura's accusing face to the irrefutable proof on the screens. He was cornered by a ghost from the past, and evidence set in stone. Gideon stepped forward, his voice ringing with chilling authority. "My family's legacy is built on a lie," he announced to the captive audience. "A lie my grandfather silenced a man to protect, and a lie my cousin," he turned, pinning Robert with a glare, "planned to use for his own personal gain." The public accusation pushed Robert over the edge. His carefully constructed composure shattered into pure, unrestrained rage. "You fool, Gideon," he hissed, forgetting the live microphone just inches from his mouth. "I was trying to protect us. I knew the truth, and I kept it buried. You and your pathetic little waitress have ruined everything." The confession, amplified for all to hear, echoed in the dead silence of the ballroom. In a single self-incriminating breath, Robert had confirmed a century of corruption and authored his own spectacular downfall. He stood alone, exposed under the glittering chandeliers, the king of a corrupt castle that had just crumbled to dust around him. The aftermath of the gala was a whirlwind of headlines and resignations. The Pierce dynasty was shaken, but in the ensuing quiet, it was being reborn, not broken. Weeks later, in a sun-drenched private hospital suite, a fragile peace had settled. Laura Holloway, looking out over a green garden, had a light in her eyes that Eliza hadn't seen in years. The weight of a lifetime of secrets had finally been lifted. Gideon Pierce entered the room quietly, no longer an untouchable tycoon, but a man humbled by the truth. He didn't offer empty apologies. Instead, he placed a leather-bound document on the table beside Laura's bed. "The Daniel Owen Pierce Foundation," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "It will exist to fund the independent inventors and artists my family tried to crush. A significant portion of my family's fortune will serve as its endowment with the estate of Owen Calloway as its first honorary beneficiary." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. It was more than restitution. It was justice forged into a new legacy. Laura simply reached out and placed her hand over Gideon's. "You have honored him," she whispered. "You have honored them all." Gideon then looked at Eliza, pulling his own phoenix ring from his finger and placing it next to the one that had started it all. The 2 rings, twin flames of pale gold, lay side by side, finally reunited. "One for the builder, one for the guardian," he said, his gaze locking with hers. "I can rebuild the company, but it has been missing its soul for a century. Help me bring it back, Eliza." It was an offer not of money or power, but of purpose. Looking at the 2 ring symbols of a promise finally kept, Eliza saw a clear path forward. "Yes," she said, her voice firm and her heart full. "Let's give them a legacy to believe in." A single sentence in a late-night diner set in motion a chain of events that rewrote history. Eliza Holloway, a waitress who fought for her mother's honor, proved that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a power that no fortune can suppress. And Gideon Pierce, a billionaire trapped in a gilded cage of lies, discovered that true wealth isn't about what you inherit, but about the integrity you choose to build. Their story reminds us that every family has its secrets and that it sometimes takes the courage of an outsider to bring the truth to light, allowing the phoenix to finally rise from the ashes. If this story of truth, justice, and the incredible power of one person's voice moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story that's more than just fiction. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true life dramas that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Click that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for listening.